Welcome back to Mr Fogherty's time travel adventures in the book called Lost in Time by RJ Hampson. So the page we're going to do today is called Merry Monks. Set in the Middle Ages, Mr Fogherty enjoys a refreshing ale and convivial hospitality in a monastery. So I've put a piece of paper over here because I find that's quite distracting for you on the camera. I've got Derwent Inktense here to the side. I also have some Derwent watercolour pencils, some Derwent Graphitint pencils, and a few random other watercolour pencils. So I'm going to use a combination of those today. And I've got water brushes, a little palette in case I need it, some water, and paper towels. So that's all I'm going to use to get started. I have very cheap and a very bent brush there, but these are quite cheap water brushes that I've picked up in, I think it was just in a store called Kmart here in Australia, or you know, fairly cheap store anyway. I've got my pages clipped and paper clipped down because I do have the window open and the window is blowing the page around, so just so that we stay in the right place here, and hopefully I've got you in a good setup here to see what I'm doing. And let's get started. So I'm just going to wet that with the water pot just to get it started. Now I thought that this one, being in a monastery, there's going to be lots of browns, so that's why I chose the Derwent Inktense pencils, because they do have quite a good range of brown in these pencils. So I'm going to get started with Mr Fogherty, as I quite often do, and I'm using Oak, which is 1730. Wet the paper down, and I'm going to start by just doing a very light watercolour type effect that I want to get going here. And I can build up the colour once I know that I've got everything in the right places. So if I start off lightly, I can give myself scope to go darker, and I can preserve highlights as I go darker. If I go dark too soon and I lose those highlights, I then have to bring in another product to try and recover a highlight. And if you've watched me for any length of time, you know that's not something I set out to do. I'd prefer not to bring white and other things in if I can help it, but sometimes I forget myself and it becomes necessary to do that. So what I'm doing here is darkening the bottom part of his sleeve, leaving the highlight at that top part of the sleeve. And then this part of his body that's underneath the sleeve will be darker again. So already starting to think about where we need some of the darker colours, but not going too dark, just a little bit at the moment. And this is quite a nice brown, this oak. It's not too warm, so that means that I can bring in other warm colours over the top of it if I need to brighten things up as time goes on. So I hope that this video finds you well. And if you have this book, I hope that you're enjoying working in it just like I am. I've enjoyed bringing in a few different brands of pencils and different types of mediums to show you. I have my favourites, of course, but it's always good to shake things up a little bit. So even now I'm just starting to make these areas where the pleats in the fabric are behind, you know, there's a fold in front of it, then I'm making it that little bit darker already. If this is your first time watching me, this book is an Amazon Australia printed book. I live in Australia, and the Amazon Australia printed books do allow me to use a decent amount of water. They do still wrinkle and cockle, but that isn't something that bothers me. But the paper does allow me to use a reasonable amount of water before I start to do any serious damage, like pilling the paper or tearing the paper. So it is entirely up to you to decide whether you like to have a book that starts to look a bit rough and ready, like mine does sometimes. I know some people don't like that. They want their books to stay in a really good condition, but in the spirit of experimenting and just really enjoying my colouring time, I don't worry too much about that. Okay, so that's part of his habit is done, and I might also do this character here in the same sort of brown. Now I got asked what was the purpose of wetting the paper and taking the colour from the tip when I use watercolour pencils, or it might have been the Neo Colour too. And the reason being, more than anything else, is that I actually do not enjoy the way it looks when I work directly onto the paper and then dilute the pencil with water directly on the paper. It is a much more saturated, solid look than I'm looking for. What I'm hoping to do here is to mimic a watercolour-like effect. And then you could say, well, why not just use watercolours? But it isn't always convenient to use watercolours. Sometimes I sit with the book on my lap and I'm in front of the TV, and watercolours just does not work when you've got pots of water and palettes, and I've got quite a big dog who likes to jump on and off the couch and so on. You know, that just doesn't work for me. Another reason is that sometimes it hasn't always been easy for me with my budget to have a large range of watercolours. And watercolours, you don't need a lot of colours to be able to mix new colours from them. You can do that with a fairly basic set, but good quality watercolours are not necessarily cheap. And I already have these Inktense pencils and other pencils, so that comes into it as well. And it's definitely for me the enjoyment factor. I do not like the look when I colour directly onto the paper and try to dilute it. I just never get a look that I'm satisfied with. So that's why I've developed this way of working. I find this to be more versatile for me, pardon me, to get some different texture and different looks, different intensity going, whereas when I just scribble onto the paper and dilute it, it's much more saturated, and I just don't seem to create the same sort of variety that, you know, it just doesn't please me. You can see there I haven't used as much water, so the colour is much more intense and more solid, but it's still quite varied like a watercolour would be. So I'm not advocating that anybody has to work this way. I show you this way because I was asked to demonstrate how I get the look that I do. And so I started to share this way on videos, but it isn't to everybody's liking, and I'm certainly not telling anybody that they must work this way either. Now, what's this guy got on? He's got, looks like he's got some sort of apron over his habit and a belt, doesn't it? So I might change things up for colour wise here, and I'm going to start using mustard, which is, oh gosh, my number's wearing off, 1750, is it? Sorry if I'm wrong there, but it's called mustard. So I want this bit here to look like he's got possibly a leather apron or something like that on. I want him to look different to those other characters, of course. So we'll make this look like he's got some sort of big apron on over his habit. Sometimes I wet the paper before I put the colour in, sometimes I don't, but I find the colour doesn't bleed and blend as well when I don't wet the paper first, so given that's a look that I enjoy and like, I tend to wet the paper first when I think about it. Other times I jump in and then I'm disappointed because the colour isn't blending and I've forgotten to wet it first. So I have many books that I wouldn't work in this way because I don't want them to get too wrinkled and cockled and too damaged. They might be books that have cost me more money, or they're out of print now and I can't get them again, or whatever. And then there are some books like these Amazon printed books that I like to experiment and really make the most of them. And I actually don't mind that they get a bit battered and worn, and it just says to me that the book is well loved. And I don't show my books to anybody else, so once I'm finished with the book it goes back into the bookcase, and I don't often flip through them unless I'm looking for something to colour or I'm sharing it for my completed pages video or something. Those books rarely come back out, so the fact that these pages get very wrinkled and buckled doesn't mean a lot to me, because the enjoyment for me is in the doing, not the looking at them later. So you know, I don't let that bother me too much. I'm going to use this as the basis of snail shell on this one, and I will bring other colours into it as well, of course, but we'll just get a little bit of colour on there to get started. And that colour can go aside there now. So this guy here, is he just like a very rotund squirrel? Is that what he is? He's got those little ears, and I think he looks a bit like a squirrel myself. So I apologise if you're watching at all, Russell, if I'm getting your characters wrong, but that's what I'm interpreting him as. It could be a skunk, of course, couldn't he? But let's do him as a red squirrel. Because they look like squirrel ears to me. Could be wrong, but anyway, it's my book, so you know, we get to interpret things how we want in our own book, don't we? And I'm going to use Baked Earth as well. So that's Red Oxide 1910 and Baked Earth, which is 1800. So now the Baked Earth is much more orangey. So we'll use those two colours together. So if you can hear some noises, I have the window open today and it's quite windy. So we have lots of noise coming in, but it's just so pleasant to have some cool air, damp air. We've had a shower, but it's not come to much yet. And it's just nice to have that window open and have that coming in. So I do apologise if I think it's much too noisy, then obviously you won't even know I'm talking about this, and I'll do a voiceover over the top of it. So okay, so back to the red oxide. Okay, now to break things up, I'm going to give him a different coloured shirt. I mean, it would probably be brown, but I am going to give him a blue shirt. And I'm going to use iron blue because it's not a real bright blue. We'll leave it quite muted, and then it fits in with that medieval Middle Ages sort of colour scheme, but we've got some variation from all the brown going on. So Derwent Inktense pencils can be a little bit too overpowering sometimes. So they're called Inktense and they are intense colours. So if you find that a bit overwhelming and you want to try using them in a slightly more subdued manner, you can try working this way like I am, and it dilutes the colour, and they are nowhere near as vibrant as they are when you colour onto the paper heavily and then activate it. Okay, so that'll probably do for now. Now Mr Fogherty's having ale, so I actually might use that mustard to be the base of the ale colour. And if I can't achieve everything I want to achieve with the Whoops, that should have had maybe a white frothy head on it. If I can't achieve everything I want with the Inktense pencils, then I just come in later with coloured pencils and add a few extra colours to achieve what I'm hoping for. Okay. Now this guy, he's going to be drinking some red wine, so I'm going to use Shiraz, if I can find it. Here we go. So Shiraz is 0600, and he's going to have a little bit of that, either Shiraz or port maybe. And Snail is going to be in a pool of that because he's overdone the red wine rather than ale, because I just want that bit of extra colour. Okay, and let's do that as a drop of red wine as well. There is a winery in the Clare Valley region of South Australia, and it was founded by a monastery. I can't remember what the order was called now. If I think about it, I'll add it to the description or something. Anyway, my husband and I went there for the first time last year actually, and bought several bottles home with us because it was really, really nice wine, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Okay, so we'll leave that out for now. Let's put some colour on Mr Fogherty. Let's get some green going. So I'm going to use Fern, which is 1560, and let's get a light base of green down for him to start. Mustn't forget his knobbly knees. Okay. Going back to why I work this way, I find this method really relaxing. It's difficult to put into words why, but if for some reason it's more relaxing than using markers and coloured pencils for me. Okay, so that's Fern. And this little guy up here, I wonder if is he some sort of cricket or is he a turtle or something? Let's do him green as well. We can always tone it down with other colours. We'll just get a green base going in there. And then I'm going to use light olive, which is 1540. I'm going to use that down here on Snail, and he's going to look very green. He's gone to sleep. And we'll use a little bit of that light olive just to tone down any area of Mr Fogherty that looks like it should be either in shadow or to help us depict a bit of shape. Okay, so that's looking good so far, hopefully. Now the wine barrels, they're usually sort of a golden honey brown sort of colour. I don't want to use the mustard again, but I might use amber, and I'm going to have to sharpen this. So one of my favourite colours with the mustard and the amber together, I quite often use them for many things. Amber is 1710. Let's get some water in there. So of course different types of wood are used for different wine barrels, so we could potentially change things up by making them look like slightly different woods. And we might do this one here. And I'll use different intensities, so I won't dilute it so much in some areas and have it more washed out in others. Now once the Inktense has dried, when it's been activated with water and then it dries, it should be pretty permanent. The only time it continues to dilute and change after you've activated it is if it's a very heavy application of pencil that hasn't been fully diluted or activated with water enough. And then you will find if you come back later it can move again, but that also means that you can overlay your colours in layers and it won't affect that initial layer of colour too much. It certainly won't move it, but of course when you layer colours over each other you're going to get a completely different look. So if a little bit of that goes over this monk habit here, that doesn't really matter too much. Okay, so the one that snail's coming out of here I think needs to be a little bit darker. So we'll build that up bit by bit. And that colour might actually go well in there with, what did I use there? That was mustard, wasn't it? So the amber and the mustard together might work okay for a beer colour. We'll let that go and dry. And then these barrels behind, I'm going to go back to more of a brown, I think, because I want it to look a bit different. So let's have a look what tan will look like. It won't be too different. What about willow? We go willow might be nice. So I've still got a little bit of colour there in my brush where I didn't clean it off properly. If I was using a completely different colour it would be important, but because they're all browns it's not really going to matter too much. But just be careful if you're using this method of lifting from the pencil when you do it over your work that you don't unintentionally flick colour or drip colour where it shouldn't be. Okay, I'm going to use a combination of the two here because I feel like that might all be a bit too solid. So that's a bit of amber and willow. So let's get this wet up here. And I might use the amber first. And then I'm going to use the willow. And I'm going to let them bleed into each other. Back to the willow. And I've got to be careful and not have so much water here because I've got all these little fine details to get into and I don't want it to bleed all over Mr Fogherty, so I will use it a little bit more dry there. But we want this to darken up a little bit behind all this action that's going on here in the front. And then when that dries, I'll think about coming back with colour to actually start to describe the shape better. And then the one behind we will do mostly willow, because we want that to appear a bit darker because it's behind, and that will help everything else to come in front of it. And a little bit of that where I've forgotten down here as well. And I might have to let that dry a little bit. Okay, so let's get started on some more things. So to brighten things up, I'm going to do this stained glass window in the back in some bright colours. And I'm going to start by using a red. So I might use chili red. So I thought this will bring some nice pop of colour into things. Just a bit fiddly. Okay, so we've got a little bit of red there, and we might also do a little bit of red in this section here. So the idea is to make this a little bit brighter. And I'm also going to use some orange, so I might go for tangerine. Looks nice and bright. So the tangerine I might do in that little middle bit there. And we might also do it in this little section in here. Okay. Don't think we'll need that again. That was tangerine or 0300. And then I want a yellow. I'm going to go for golden yellow. And I'm going to do this part. Trying not to let the colours bleed too much, but if they do, it doesn't really matter, but technically for a stained glass window you'd want it to be distinct colours. And because these parts are so small, I'm not going to worry about shading or getting any real variation in the light just yet, but in the larger pieces I will. So that was golden yellow, 0230. And then in this centre section, I think I might do a purple. So I'm thinking about a nice deep violet perhaps, or violet. Oh, you go for violet. So what I'm going to do here is then in the bits where it's dry, I'm going to wet that first and then run it along the edges and let it bleed in towards the middle. Like that. And because that's quite wet, I'll let that dry before I go into the one next to it. Or I might even go for a different colour yet, we'll see. But again, just along the edge and let that bleed into the wet section. And if it's not doing it quite as much as I want, I'll add a little bit of extra water and just see if that will encourage it to bleed in like that. And we'll let that go all patchy because I'm going to hope that it looks like there is light coming through there and making it a mottled effect. So that was the deep violet. We'll let that do its thing. So deep, sorry, that was violet, 0800. And I'm sorry if you can hear the wind picking up out there. And then we might go for, what should we go for there? Maybe, let's go for mauve. And we'll let that blend a little bit. So mauve is 0740, I believe. Some of my writing is wearing off of my pencils and I don't have any swatches, I'm afraid, to refer to, so if you go off of the colour name, it's mauve. So we'll do that. And in the centre part we might go for a blue. Let's go for peacock blue. Okay, we'll do all those edges later. Well, actually I could do the outer edges now. I do use the peacock blue on the larger sections here of the glass. Well, actually I'm doing this a bit awkward. It looks like Russell's done 2 large sections and a small section, whereas I'm going for alternate sections, so I haven't followed the pattern very well, I'm afraid. Fiddly with a brush, but good for practice. Okay. And then this, I'm going to do the bright sky through those arches. So I'm going to use iris blue to imply that these arches are opening out into the outdoors. And again, just introducing another colour to break up all the brown. Okay, and possibly a little bit of that just showing through on that darker blue there. And maybe even just a little tiny bit of a suggestion of that in the centre of these colours. Just the barest minimum suggestion there. Okay, I'm also going to bring in a little bit of that into this guy's shirt. And let's get that iron blue back again. And darken up the edges a bit more. Okay, that just helps tell that story about what the folds in his shirt are doing. Now he's got a barrel there as well. We might use willow that we used up here on these barrels, if I can find it. So let's do this bit here first, so I'm not working over wet areas. So now I'm starting to think about where it might be a little bit darker behind them. And of course wood isn't necessarily all one even tone, especially natural wood. So anywhere where I want to imply that this character is in front of the barrel, I'm going to darken the barrel up slightly behind them. So I think you'll agree that this is a much more subtle colour result than when you work with the pencils directly on the paper. Sometimes it can be a little bit too vibrant for what you're wanting straight away. Now, if I do want to get into these tighter areas, of course I could do this just on some small areas and then activate it and even go over this damp paper. Now if I do that going over the damp paper, I've got a point that is not very sharp. It's blunted on the end, otherwise I will tear the paper up. So I can use the brush to activate that and blend it out. Otherwise, if I come over this section later with water, it is going to blend and move, and not necessarily at a time I want it to. So again, just over that damp paper very lightly, because I could very easily put holes in the paper, especially if my pencil had a sharp tip. And that's another way that you can build your colour up. So I'd only advise that if you've got an area that you want to be very solid and dark and maybe more saturated than other areas. A bit of a splash there. Okay, so let's do this little barrel here under this guy's arm. And this is the willow. I haven't really left any really bright white highlights. The highlights are going to be quite subtle, I think. Alright, let's go with the guys here with the dark. That was the, let me think about it. That was the oak. Just want to darken up a few areas here and get a little bit of contrast and detail happening. So the area underneath his sleeve here, I'll leave the sleeve quite light I think at this stage, and then darken up some of these areas down here, especially these ones that are in the folds of the fabric. And here I could maybe go a little bit darker again because it's in an area that would be quite shadowed. And then activate that with the brush and drag the colour out. And again, just in this fold. So thinking about where the deeper shadows would be. Now, is this a mole here, I think? Maybe? And I've just realised that I've missed a section of the barrel here. So I think that's a mole there. I'm going to look for something deeper and darker. So Maybe chocolate. Let's get chocolate to start with. And I might use that chocolate to get started on this one's nose. And again, I've missed something here. I'm not concentrating too well today. This is Willow. Go back and finish this barrel where I've missed all of this. A little bit of shadow. Okay, and now Mr Fogherty's habit, we'll bring in a little bit, I might bring in a little bit of the willow, just to warm up where the light might be hitting it a little bit more. And that's good. And then we might use, let's have a look. We'll use the oak to do his little cap here. I'm also going to use that to do his pipe. We'll leave the stripe on the pipe to be a darker, lighter colour. And the willow will also use a little tiny bit in this guy's habit as well, just to show that the fabric is the same on Mr Fogherty and this one. Like that. And then I think I'll use a green to do the bottle down here. So this is the fern green that we started on Mr Fogherty with. We'll put a little tiny bit of that into Snail. And just darken up a few areas on this little guy up here. Got his hand there. And we might also put some of this into the stained glass window. I didn't pay very good attention to the layout of the pattern there, so you might want to do it differently if you're doing this page. Okay, and the strapping on the barrels, I'm going to do that a darker colour. So I'm going to go for Payne's Grey. And because I don't mind that being a bit more of a solid colour, I'm going to just colour directly onto the paper there, and then I will be diluting that. A bit darker down there. So let's get started with those and see what it looks like. So I'm hoping that the highest part of the barrel here, you know where the barrel would be at its widest, I'm going to leave that lighter to suggest a bit of light catching it. So I can see there again why I don't like working that way, because it hasn't diluted the greatest. And that really comes down to, it's one of those personal preference things, whether you like how it looks or you don't. There's no right or wrong, it's just a personal, personal thing. And I may need to come back with some black on here later and make it darker, because this is quite blue. So this is the Payne's Grey. So I'm trying to imply that it's, some sort of black strapping. And then I'm not sure what's going on behind here, but we might make that a bit darker in there behind them. Okay, so all of this up here, I want to do the brickwork, maybe in the grey. I might actually bring in some Derwent Graphitint here, Warm Grey 19. And let's see what the Derwent Graphitint go like. Graphitint are colours that have been tinted with graphite, so the graphite really dulls the colour down. It's got quite an unusual colour range to it, the Graphitint range. So it's water soluble like a watercolour pencil. So again, this is all stonework and brickwork, so we want it to look quite textured, you know, like it's not a perfect surface. And we'll see how that goes working with it this way. It's quite light. It's got a really different look about it when you use it different ways. So when you work directly onto the paper, it looked quite grey and very dull. And when I'm working with it this way, it's almost got a sort of light purplish tinge to it. And that is warm grey, so it's a very warm colour working with it that way. So do make sure if you have Derwent Graphitint that you try your swatches in two ways. Actually, I can show you some swatches for this one because I did swatch these, and I did swatch these now that I come to think of it. So the Graphitint so the warm grey, that's drawn onto the paper, directly onto the paper. Here it's drawn onto the paper and then diluted and then tried there, and then here is wetting the paper, lifting it from the paper and dropping it in. So you can see the different ways that it looks when you use it different ways. You can certainly see it with that colour there. So you can see the Derwent Graphitint really are a different range of colours. Now this one was I wet the paper and then did the pencil directly onto the wet paper. So I'm just going to leave that in front of me there. So if you hear some little noises, it is a hanging basket outside my window that's swinging about in the breeze. I hope it's not too annoying because it's lovely to sit here with that window open, and of course I'm listening to the birds as well. Okay, so that we've got a layer of that down started there. So that was the warm grey graphitint, which is number 19. Okay, so I'm going to do a belt here for this rather rotund fellow. So let's use the oak, I think. Okay, let's have a look and see where we're lacking some. It's actually darker in real life than it's showing here on the screen, at least. There's something to do with the lighting today, maybe. Okay, so that little bit of oak for a dark colour, I'm just going to do in some shadow, what I would perceive to be shadowy areas. Okay, and there's still not a lot of contrast going on here. So we'll do under this table, and we'll do a little bit over there. Now we're going to have a helicopter come over as well. I have to admit, I don't necessarily like hearing the helicopters go over because they are often used here when there's a road accident, and there's also the police one that they use, so that's a medic retrieval one, and then there's the police have a helicopter that they use when they're tracking people and following people and so on. But it's like when I hear an ambulance, I always sort of feel that little tug of, you know, I hope whoever is in there is okay. But especially when it's a long weekend like it is at the moment, there's always horrible road accidents. So okay, let's start brightening up some of these areas again as well. So I'm going to use the mustard and the amber. To start maybe getting some texture and details into these barrels. Okay, and also that was what we used for this guy. And what I'm going to do, I think, to start brightening things up, I'll bring in that touch of yellow, the golden yellow that's up in this window up here, and perhaps start to bring a little bit of that into some of these areas as well, just to brighten it up. Okay, not everywhere, because again it loses its impact, but perhaps a little bit in that ale. I'm going to have to put some white in there where I've lost the highlight. Now, his glass here, we're going to be seeing some of the colour. We'll get willow. Some of the colour is going to be showing through his glass. And I've forgotten the strapping there, so we need the Payne's grey for that. What did I do with the Payne's grey? Did I put that away? I did. Start darkening up some of these. Okay. And then this Shiraz. So I want the frothy bit to look a bit more like a pink. So I'm just going to use a deep rose for that. I might just put a little touch of that deep rose around the glass up here as well, just for some extra colour. And this little guy at the front would be drinking out of some sort of wooden tankard by the looks of it, so let's use mustard for that. And we're going to need some silver, so I might use a metallic gel pen for some of that detail. And on the top of that tankard there as well. Let's just use mustard for the mixing stick here, but this is only a tiny bit of water with it, so it's a little bit deeper in colour. And I'm going to use that mustard for his little cap there as well. Now, is that coming down? I think that's coming down from there. And the table I want to do in a different colour, but I don't know what I'm going to do there. Maybe the table can be in chocolate with a bit of Shiraz. So if I can find that dark chocolate. So let's get the Shiraz ready. It's a bit like a rich mahogany or cherry table or something. Cherry wood. I just need it to be different colour to everything else that's around it. And we might do a gold inlay or some sort of inlay. Okay. Now we need to think about snail, and I've got a feeling I'm going to want to use a bit of colour pencil on here as well, but let's get started with some willow. So the outer edge of his shell I'll darken up, and then I'll do some darker colour on this patterns and lines that are in his shell that help to describe the shape of the shell as well, and just a little bit of dark there to try and imply that it's round. And then again on here. And what I do there is where this top part of the shell is, I leave a little tiny bit of lighter colour so that it looks like that is bit of shell is higher than this part of the shell, so that the shell's coming out a bit. And then let's get the dark chocolate. And we can do a little bit more dark in places, not all around, but just in places to highlight the markings and the shadows so on snail shell. And we might have to darken up under here a little bit, so we'll do a bit of dark chocolate with the Shiraz down here. Now the floor, I'm thinking I might use the same Derwent tint that I used at the top there, which is Warm Grey 19. And I'm going to use it on a side so that it's quite textured. And then that way, if I don't dilute it all correctly and it leaves any sort of texture, it will help describe what the you know, the floor is doing. And that's the squirrel's tail. So let's just wet that. So I'm using quite a bit of water here, which is a slight problem in that I haven't really buckled the rest of the page too much so far, but by adding lots of water at the bottom here, I could make that bottom part go very wrinkly when the rest of the page isn't actually looking too bad. So remember, once the Inktense is dry, it shouldn't bleed back over the lines when you're re-wetting an area like this. It should stay put if you've activated it correctly and there's no undiluted colour. And we might do that colour in the background here. So now I'm going to use Indian ink in the Inktense, which is 2020, and do quite a dark shoe under there, but I have diluted it a bit so it's not black. And then I'm going to add a little bit of that just under here. So Russell's already given us a fair idea where the shadows are going to be, and when he's done the cross hatching a little bit closer together and darker and intense, it gives you a good indication that that's where a dark shadow should be. You know, I don't normally like to do too much black in a page, but because we've got so much brown here already, I feel like we do need an extra dark shadow to ground these characters. And I can try and put a bit of colour back in there as well to brighten it up later. Yes, that's much more dramatic, isn't it? So we might use a tiny bit of that just in these underside of the barrels. That would be in the most shadow. And the same with the inside of his hood there. So like with everything, if you're selective with your use of black, or you know, as close to black as you can be, if you're selective about it, it has a much greater impact. I'm just going to leave a bit of texture there, I think, and I'm liking that a lot better. Okay. Now I've got a few things that I've missed in here going on, so let's see if I can work out what it is I've missed. I think that that should be yellow, and I should have a bit of red. Let's make that a little bit more vibrant. Okay. I'm going to leave the plate white. And we need a bit of colour through that glass. So this is mustard, and I'm going to put a little bit of mustard in different places down here now. And I'm not waiting for it all to dry fully so that it does have the potential to blend and mix a little bit. How's that looking? That's probably a little bit better. Now the mustard, I think, like this guy's got here, this little guy's got an apron on as well, so let's do that. And we might leave his shirt white. There's a bit to work out what's going on there. So there's probably a bit of window behind there again as well, so I need to grab a bit of the purple that I had. Well, I'll use the mauve, and I'll just do a bit of that there. It's a little bit hard to work out what's going on there. And we might leave that little rag or fabric there white, but just do a little bit of shadow on it. So that's the Payne's Grey, and that's what I'm going to use in the steam and the, yeah, steam, isn't it, that's coming up there. always put some white Prismacolor over that. Now with that yellow, I'm going to come around here. And while it's wet, I'm actually going to do a little bit like that, a bit stronger in those parts. Just be careful I don't go through the paper. Okay, and while that golden yellow is out, I think I need to lighten this off a little bit too. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to use a bit of the white acrylic paint marker because I want that to look like froth. And those little bits there. And the same there. Just to remind me. Now, I've forgotten Mr Fogherty's eyelids again. Put a little bit of fern on there. And I'm going to add a little bit of colour this way. And activate that. And let's do the bottle. We might do some coloured pencil on there, maybe, but we'll do the bottle a bit brighter. Let's use teal green. To indicate a little bit of detail. Might actually put a bit of that onto poor Snail because he looks a little bit drab and he's disappearing down here, so let's just brighten him up a bit. So that is teal green. And I'll use a little touch of that in this little guy up here. Brighten him up a bit too. So this is what I've achieved with the Inktense, and I think I'm just going to bring in some Prismacolor pencil now to finish doing the brickwork up here. Because I don't really have a colour I want to use in the Inktense. I don't have the full set of Inktense, I've just got the original 72 colours. So I'm going to do some work on the bricks with pencil and some detail. Now, while I was waiting for it to dry, I have actually used some gel pens, some silver and a black metallic, and I've put that onto areas like here in this mug, although I didn't finish that bit there. So just some little areas on the mug, on the table, the knife, the belt buckle and so on, the tankards, and a little bit of black. What did I use the black on? Oh, in the window, that's right. So what I thought I'd do is I'll just show you how I might tackle finishing this off now. So I'm going to get some browns to do in Mr Fogherty and this character, but I really want to concentrate on putting a bit of texture into these little barrels. So I'm going to use, I think I might use chocolate. And I don't want to go overboard, but I just want to try and indicate that, you know, there would be some different bits of detail and grain and so on in the wood. And I'm not going to do a lot, and I'm not pressing very hard. In fact, I've kind of got the lead off to the side a bit. So I'm just going to do, oops, here we go, we've got a broken lead there. And I've got a sharpener here that doesn't want to work. Let's try the battery operated. No, this is going to be one of those pencils that keeps breaking. It's chocolate. Okay, so hopefully your lighting's getting okay, because it's getting very dark in my room here. All natural daylight's disappearing fast. So I want to try and get this finished tonight if I can. So with that same pencil, I'm just going to use it to do similar sorts of things on all the barrels, regardless of their base colour. And Russell has done some lines for us to suggest some wood grain and things happening with the planks in the barrel. So it's a good idea to use that as a guide. Now that's a little bit darker, that one, so I might go with sepia. Just darken that one up a little bit. Send that backwards a little bit, and we'll use a little bit of sepia just to darken some areas on the habit. A little bit on snail shell. So just getting a little bit of sharper, defined marks that I wasn't able to get with that brush. Just underneath that belt, maybe there would be a little bit of shadow. And I'm going to use a little bit of goldenrod. and the same in Mr Fogherty's Ale. And a little bit of yellow ochre now, just in some of these barrels that were a little bit warmer, and in there. A little bit in snail shell there. Okay, and the red wine needs a little bit of something here, so let's use Crimson Lake. Just to brighten that up a little bit. And that just adds that little bit of colour there. And we'll use a little bit of that in there, and then I need a bit of a brighter red. So permanent red we'll use down there. A little bit here and there in the window, just to brighten it up. And then for these bricks, I'd like to use a warm grey. Let's have a look. So 30% French grey we'll start with. And I'm just going to do it quite patchy. And I'm sort of going around the edges of the bricks and leaving the inside of the bricks, that section, quite light coloured. Again, I don't feel like this is the important part of the picture. The important part of the picture is all going on here. So this doesn't have to necessarily be perfectly depicted brickwork. The thing is really with brickwork, don't make it too regular, because if you look at a house, it's very rare that every single brick has got the exact same shadow and colouring. Oh, excuse me. You know, they're all a bit irregular, and when you see every single brick coloured in exactly the same way with no variation, it looks a little bit bizarre, because that's not what happens generally. So this is French grey 70% now, and I'm just going to, in some of these sort of areas where the bricks, I'll show you better over here in the light, the edges of the bricks where the bricks meet, or the stones meet, there will be a bit of a shadow in that join. But don't go and outline every single one, because that's going to look very unnatural. So make it irregular, darker in some areas, thicker in others, none at all in some places. And then you can transfer that into the actual sort of corners of the bricks as well. So again, thinking about where a shadow might be falling, that's where you'll use it a little bit darker. And you might sort of do a lot on one brick and nothing on another brick. But I generally like peter it out a little bit. I don't do abrupt stops. So like this whole section here might appear darker because that's behind, as is that. So if it's in shadow, you're not going to see very many details at all. So you're certainly not going to see the same detail on here as you are on these outer bricks that are closer to us. In fact, you may not be seeing any detail at all. Now the artist has to sort of draw something in there to suggest what's going on to you, but you don't need to make that the feature of the you know, the image. So then let's go to 90%. Got some rain starting again. The sky's got a very funny colour. So this is where, again, you know, you get even more selective with this darker colour. You see how that's starting to come alive, and don't necessarily blend it too smoothly either. Have some lines and cross hatching and, you know, a bit of a scumbling effect. Scumbling is when you scribble. It doesn't necessarily have to all be really perfectly suggested. And then of course we'll bring in some of these other colours, the mustardy colours, into it. So I will use the I like ginger root for doing stuff like this. So it's got a slightly yellow greenish tinge to it, but not a real strong colour in itself. And I just like to bring that into some areas. Again, not everywhere, and you can use it to actually blend out some of that darker colour that you got there and the texture. Yeah, that's starting to build up quite nicely, and it's also a nice change from the blended smooth look of the Inktense to have that bit of texture here and there. So let's go back to the first colour, which was 30% French grey. And don't forget, behind this little guy here we've got a bit going on there, but it is hard to read what's going on, so I'm going to darken that up. And in there as well. And you can use, you know, all that combination of colours to do all the different bits of texture and details. You know, so if the ginger root starts to get a little bit too yellow, you come back and tone it down again with your French grey. How's that looking? Sorry, I keep jumping up and having a look through the viewfinder so I can see how that's looking for you guys. Now, what did I do with the sepia? I needed the very dark brown anyway. I think this still needs a little bit. Actually, the light umber, we'll do a little bit of light umber for the top of the sleeve. And then let's go with the sepia. So I'm going to use the ginger root to do the little bit of rope. And in his spots, a little bit in his skin. We possibly need a little bit of extra something in that guy. Burnt ochre. And a bit in there. And I think we need a bit of something in snail. This is lime peel. And a little bit of eggshell down there. A little bit of eggshell on there, and maybe a little bit on there. A little bit on the plate. Maybe a little bit up there on the this little guy. Too much though. And that really soft French grey, I'm just going to do a little suggestion of roundness to the eyes. A little bit of shadow in there. Okay. I'm liking the way this has all worked out now. I'll just show you some of those bricks. So I may work on that a little bit more, but pretty much that's finished now. The little bit that I'll do to it will be maybe in the morning when the light is better, because it's starting to get rather dark now. So you will see on the thumbnail how I change anything, but it won't be very much. It will just be a little bit more detail in those bricks. And of course you can see my finished work on Instagram as well if you're interested. So that page was called Merry Monks, and that's another one finished in our Lost in Time colouring book. So thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed that one, and I'll see you again really soon. Bye now.